So welcome. Maybe it's too loud.
It is.
Welcome to our fourth in a series of 5 sessions on the general topic of discerning a Christian orientation towards the future. And our entree was to see if we couldn't break the apocalypse code. We've made some progress in the last 3 sessions, which I'm not going to summarize in any great depth today in order to get to our topic. But happily, Kent and the tech crew, Wyatt and others, have done a great job of curating this for audio and video recording. So all of these sessions are going to be available on the church website for your review. I'm going to exploit that capacity and just dive into our session today. Everybody's got a handout. That handout, is a kind of a catch-all list of titles regarding the future, biblical, apocalyptic, and so forth for your own perusal. And in today's session, we're going to do a little bit something a little bit different. We're going to lay out, we've familiarized ourselves a little bit with the way pre-modern people, that would include the biblical writers, the way pre-modern people, that would include medieval theologians, the pre-modern people, that would include indigenous peoples all over the world, conceptualized or talked about or thought about the future. Okay. There's a significant difference between that and the way modern people, that would be us, think about the future in the categories. So what we're going to do in today's session is do a little bit of review, kind of summarize that pre-modern notion of talking about and thinking about the future, and then lay out the outlines, if you will, of the modern way of thinking about the future for the purpose of, and this is key, next week, see if we can't integrate those. And that will be our great challenge. So you've got to come back. Let's do a little bit of review. When the Bible writers were writing the story of the Eden story in the book of Genesis, or the flood story, they were not using what we would call an historical mode of discourse. They're using what we would largely call a mythological mode of discourse. But the biblical writers shifted into a more historical mode when they started narrating the story of Abram, the father of the Israelites, and that would eventually flesh out into the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, and even the Islamic religion. When that story begins and God begins to speak to Abram, remember Abram at that point is living in a place called Mesopotamia, and God has an intent for Abram to live in Palestine or in the Levant. And so he speaks these words in Genesis, God to Abraham, saying, "Go from your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and you are to be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." If there is a programmatic statement in the Bible, that's it, where the history begins with the promise of God, which means history is driven by the promise of God, and that in a nutshell is the historiography. You're going to love this, John. The historiography that was articulated by the biblical writers. Here's what I mean. The biblical writers recognized that the great impediment to the fulfillment of God's promises, which are to be unfolded in the course of history, are thwarted. God's promises are inhibited. God's promises are challenged by the great geopolitical powers of the age. Real quickly, you have, and this, by the way, this little chart shows you most of the biblical period covering, notice the time when the Israelites were under the rule of Egypt. That raises a question. What's going to happen to God's promise if the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt? And then later, they were overtaken by the Assyrians. What's going to happen to God's promise? And the Babylonians, same question. And virtually everything we find, certainly in the law and the prophets, is generated by that question by people by Moses. He's writing concerning this relationship. Isaiah is writing concerning this relationship, Assyria and the people of God's promise. Jeremiah is writing about this relationship, Babylon and the people of God's promise, because they are concerned with how history unfolds relative to God's promise to, in history, bless all the nations, all the families of the world. As time went on, And in the later generations of the Old Testament period, writers like Zechariah and Daniel will be responding to, let's just say, the apparent failure of God's promises to be fulfilled in history under these pagan foreign rulers who inhibit it. Things got to a fever pitch when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem and exiled the Israelites, but even more so under the Greek rule. We saw this in previous sessions, where it became illegal to practice Judaism. Well, what's going to happen to God's promise if we can't be God's people in the world according to the law that God gave us? And then later under Rome, when the Romans conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. You see how the question is exacerbated. So writers like Zechariah and Daniel adopted a different historiography. They used, as we saw, what we called apocalyptic grammar. Elements of discourse and narration and report, so that the reader reads a text that elevates the earthly events to a cosmic scale, a cosmic horizon, articulated in a mythology rich with visionary images. Remember that the angels and the horrid monsters that Daniel saw in his visions. This is all part of that apocalyptic grammar, elevating what the Israelites are experiencing to a level of narrative that's familiar in terms that we're going to cover in just a second. The imagery of that apocalyptic grammar I just referred to imagines the end of the rule of these oppressive geopolitical powers. That is, the end of the world, the eschaton, the end of history. That's the new way of discourse in writers like Daniel and Zechariah. We've called that apocalyptic. So far, so good? Now, you know my routine. You're going to be dunked. I have got a barrel of information. I'm just going to keep soaking you, and enough of it will stick. So they're anticipating the end of history. Why the end of history? Why does it take that to fix the problem? Well, think about it. After 600 years of living under pagan, idolatrous, brutal, foreign imperial rule, these writers came to the conclusion that history, the path to God's fulfillment of the promise to bless the world, had been hopelessly corrupted by imperial powers like Greece and then later by Rome. History of itself could no longer yield salvation from their control. Only eschatological judgment, you understand, eschatological means the end of everything. Only eschatological judgment on all of history could set things straight. So writers like Zechariah and Daniel. Building on that redemption myth, let me remind you, the redemption myth is things are horrible, the pagan rulers are on top, God's covenant people are on bottom, and that's chaos, remember, the chaos monster threatening the order of life. But God intervenes and brings about the rightness, if you will, into history at its end. The book of Revelation takes that application of divine redemption myth articulated by the book of Daniel and applies it to the same myth to the situation of the churches in the Roman Empire. The weird animals, the oppressive the beasts, the catastrophic storms, the strange angelic figures in the book of Revelation is a way of placing the oppressive geopolitical powers within a familiar narrative frame. What narrative frame is that? The divine redemption myth, where God intervenes and brings out of chaos order so that life thrives. Within that frame, the true nature of these geopolitical powers, Rome, and their true fate, judgment, can be recognized. So in the book of Revelation, Christ reveals to God's covenant people that Rome is yet another global imperial power who, like the previous imperial powers, asserts for itself supreme divine presence in the world. This is fundamentally the critique of apocalyptic literature about the powers in the world and their relationship to the fulfillment of God's promise. If the powers of the world, the geopolitical powers, the Greeces and the Romes, are the supreme divine presence in the world, then God and God's promise is not. And this is the stark choice that John in his book of Revelation presents before the churches, warning the churches, don't be seduced by the false god of religious nationalism, which is what was in play there. They are to bear witness to the true God and his ultimate victory over chaos. This victory is eschatological. It brings an end to the corrupt powers of things, the end of the days, which poses for us the question, well, are we living in the last days? The book of Revelation prompts that question because it gives us a lens by which to view our current situation, just like the seven churches in Revelation. Well, we've addressed much of this, and we're going to turn to a summary of how the ancients formulated this kind of question and how we do as well. Some of what we're going to cover today is familiar to you. Some of it might not be. We're going to find that the future that science imagines for us is not necessarily a hopeful one. And this often discourages people from even talking about it. So let's not be like that. Let's be the adults in the room and actually inform ourselves about how the modern response to the question looks and what answers it proposes for us. I'm going to remind you, this means in today's session, we're not going to come to a clean, nice conclusion. We're going to be spilling over into next session where we work on what we've established today. Throughout all of the world's history, where we have notions of the beginning of things and the end of things, always articulated in imaginary mythological terms because, well, think about it. How else are you going to describe the very beginning of things and the very end of things? We don't have the perceptual tools, we don't know, and so we make use of the conceptual tools we have, which in ancient times, pre-modern times as well, was mythological speculation on what we can observe. And what we observe is individual lives come to an end, but life itself continues by constant renewal through birth. This is something that is evident everywhere we see in nature, and the ancient and pre-modern peoples saw it as well. So the passing away of the old and the arrival of the new are made intelligible by means of stories we call myths, in particular myths of the eternal return. This is where life flourishes and dies, but that death becomes the basis of more life to flourish and dies, which becomes the basis of more life. You see the idea. It's everywhere in nature, and it becomes mythologized. It becomes elevated to that level of abstract thought that makes a compelling narrative. Okay, so all over the world then, we answer the question in mythological terms. Wherever you find reflections on the beginning and the end, it is expressed mythologically, often in the story of a conflict or a war, such as the divine warrior combat scenario, which we have studied together. You remember there is chaos threatening the life-supporting order. One of the gods comes forth often as a warrior or a judge and defeats the powers of chaos. This is a frequent story. So the world story, as we have inherited from the pre-moderns, has a happy ending. The hero prevails, restoring life-supporting order to the physical world, which itself is more or less eternal. Okay. The Abrahamic religions stand a little bit different, and what I mean is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's a bit different. Here, time is linear, time is purposeful, time is teleological. It's leading to something imaginable. It's leading to something intelligible. And that telos, or that goal, is often associated with a final intervention by a sovereign personal God who brings salvation and judgment to the cosmos, characterized as a field of moral behavior. Sound familiar? This is pretty much the story that we've inherited from our biblical sources and others. And Judaism and Islam in general subscribe to this view traditionally. This narrative is pre-modern because the fate and reality of the physical universe is determined by a metaphysical divine reality external to the physical universe. So if this oval represents all of reality, that would be an achievement. But let's just imagine that this oval represents all of reality. And you've got the divine, metaphysical, and you've got the physical or the mundane, and you've got a line separating them. That's a porous line on by design. It's intended to denote that the divine actually has an effect on the mundane. And so when we have, the divine is never absent from the mundane, but it's always bringing things about. But that narrative will no longer hold for us because it's no longer intelligible to us, because this is not how, in the modern world, under scientific outlook, we view reality. This is how we view reality. It does not include the metaphysical dimension, or at least the divine dimension. In our age, the universe is rendered intelligible by a different world story told through the discourse of science. So let me give you a concrete example. Let's talk about snakes, okay? Snakes are a little bit odd because unlike reptiles, unlike birds, unlike most creatures that have two eyes, most creatures with two eyes have two limbs, fins, wings, hands, something, but not snakes. They have two eyes, but they don't have any legs. So how is it? You know where I'm going with this. How is it that snakes don't have legs? Well, according to the old story, we have a story about a Nachash, whatever the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and God tells the serpent, because of what you've done, you're going to crawl on your belly all the time. And we try to represent that in even a 15th century painting. It's difficult to imagine what was that creature before, that's called a serpent, before the legs were gone or something. Now, we don't accept this. We know this is false. Okay. Now, it may have some truth to communicate, but not any kind of scientific truth. It doesn't answer the question, actually, why snakes don't have legs. But according to the modern story, we do know pretty much exactly why it is that snakes don't have legs, and that's because of evolution. And we have evidence, such as fossils of lizard-like and snake-like forms that did have legs, and we can accumulate this evidence and analyze it carefully in a generations-long effort, and we can actually map out the emergence of these creatures that we call snakes who don't have any legs, and we know why they don't. This is intelligible to us, and this is not. I'm giving you a concrete demonstration. We could multiply that almost infinitely. So in this world story, there is no combat myth. There is no other or any other metaphysical narrative structure that accounts for the way the world begins or ends. Our science gives us an exclusively physical understanding of these things, resulting in a new world story. It's still myth. The scientific story of the world is still a myth, because any story that seeks to orient and locate our place in the universe functions mythologically. Do you understand what I just said? It's not just description. It also situationally locates us relative to everything in the universe. That's what myth does, whether it's ancient or modern. Are we dialed in? Because that's important. Okay. So myth doesn't automatically mean false or misleading. It really means orienting, the orienting story. It does so, however, it orients us on the ground of empirical science. Physics, for example, explains the laws of matter and energy, and evolution explains the history of those interactions. Everything, and we learn then that everything in the universe evolves. Whether we're talking about galaxies and stars and planets, there is a history to each of them, or the emergence of life, there is a rich history to that, or even the emergence and development of culture also evolves. Everything falls under the explanatory rubric, ultimately, of the evolutionary process. So this evolutionary process has produced planetary integration, and here we get a little bit scientific. Let's go. The Earth consists of interconnected spheres that I want to briefly describe with you. One sphere is the geosphere. Okay, the geosphere is the solid Earth, from core to mantle to crust, rocks, minerals, landforms, soils, sediments, and the physical processes that shape them. Geosphere. Atmosphere, the envelope of gases from the surface all the way to space, controls weather, regulates climate, shields us from harmful radiation, and wherever you find these gases, you are in the presence of some form of the atmosphere. Hydrosphere, the world's water. All water in any form, oceans, lakes, glaciers, groundwater, soil moisture, everywhere. Everywhere you find water, you are in the presence of the hydrosphere. And these different spheres are in constant interaction with each other. And one of the fruits, or one of the products, or one of the emergent properties of that engagement of these spheres is what we call the biosphere, life. As this caption says, the biosphere, which is all life, wherever you find life, you're in the presence of the biosphere, exists as the myriad interactions among these particular spheres. One affects the other, and the others affect the one. There's a deep interconnectedness here that I want to illustrate by using you as an example. Are we good? So here you are, sitting here listening to me. Electricity right now is flowing through your nervous system, okay, correlated with your experiences of yourself as a subject. So from a physical point of view, it's the movement of ions in your brain, that's the electrical pulse that I just mentioned, corresponds to your experiences of consciousness as a self. But these ions, when I say ions, I'm just talking about potassium and chloride and sodium molecules and so forth. They don't have their own power. How do they move in this electrical pulse that is associated with human consciousness? Well, it's an energy-soaked molecule. Biologists in the room know where I'm going with this. ATP, energy dynamic molecule, moves these ions around. And this molecule, ATP, gets its energy from the food you eat. Whether it's meat or plants, ultimately the food that you eat has stored energy in it that came from the photosynthesis that is derived from the sun. Are you with me? So sun, photosynthesis, photonic energy in the plant, photonic energy eventually in the animal, photonic energy eventually in you, photonic energy in your brain moving the ions, and you can consciously make out what I'm saying because of all that. Okay? Boom. Boom. The molecule gets its energy from the food that you eat. And the result, as I said, is your present moment of consciousness. So right now, ions are flowing this way and that way because of the manner in which you have organized energy from the astrosphere, the sun, and from the atmosphere, oxygen, and from the geosphere, sodium, and the constant presence of water, the hydrosphere. All that's happening. So each of us, and by the way, what I just said, summarizes like this. The Earth's elemental matter, calcium, chloride, sodium, etc., is processed and transformed into the metabolic activity within the physical framework of the planet's interconnected systems, geosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere. And what I just said is true of absolutely every living thing. Yes, you too. So the pre-modern story recognized the interconnectedness of things, but articulated it differently. And they had an insight into the interconnected things through their philosophical reflection on what was readily observable with or without scientific instruments. Is this tracking so far? Okay, I see a general agreement. I'll take what I can get. The New World story recognizes this interconnectedness of things that comprises all of existence and life and consciousness. This interconnectedness is recognized as the result of physical processes that are well understood. And here comes the hard part. Our understanding of how all these things work enables us to describe their fate, what will happen to them. And that's not always a happy outcome. So what's the verdict on science about the end? Well, thank you. Here's the verdict. The biosphere is mortal. Okay. It will all come to an end. This is not guesswork. And this is what we call physical eschatology. Physical eschatology is simply the speaking and thinking about the end of things according to a scientific explanatory framework, as opposed to a metaphysical eschatology, which explains it by reference to a mythological set of reference. Are we good? Okay. Okay, so all right, it's all mortal. It's all coming to an end. What is this universe that is going to come to an end? How big is it? And here, I hope this connection works. Let's listen to Brian Cox, a professor, tell us about that.
It is impossible to visualize the scale of the universe. In the piece of the universe we can see, there are something like, roughly, 2 trillion galaxies. We haven't counted them all, but that's an estimate based on surveys of the local universe. 2 trillion, 2,000 billion galaxies. And each galaxy is, let's say, around the size of the Milky Way. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but the Milky Way has 400 billion stars in it. It takes light over 100,000 years to cross a galaxy. And there are 2 trillion of them in the piece of the universe we can see. And we're very sure that that piece that we can see is a small bit of what may be an infinite universe beyond. We don't know, actually. And I always say, don't get worried about that, because nobody can picture it.
Let's think about that. This is interesting. In pre-modern cosmologies, this is all the way up to, like, say, the 15th or 16th century, the Earth and its humans have always been just, we know, we're at the center of the universe. The Earth and its humans are at the center of the universe, and with all that implies cosmologically. I mean, you're saying a lot cosmologically when you say, we are located at the center of the universe. You see what I mean by a myth? It situates you. And if your myth says that you're in the middle of the universe, that's extraordinary. This is an insight that, by the way, is not unique to the Bible, or most pre-moderns elaborated this. Just a side note real quickly, the architecture of many pre-European New World structures are remarkably aligned to cosmologically, and situating that particular people in the center of the universe. That seems to be a very frequent ethnological insight, that we are the center of the universe, or we are located at the center of the universe. At any rate, that was ubiquitous in pre-modern times. In modern cosmologies, we've just learned that humans are not cosmologically at the center. And by the way, this is not a guess. We know this. In fact, we know something even further. We're not at the center, and moreover, there is no center to the universe in the modern cosmology. And because there is no center, Earth and humans face the same fate as everything else in the universe. Now, this need not be, by the way, discouraging, just a small the awareness of the universe's size can also be sublime. It can be inspirational from a different point of view, but that would not be a point of view that science would have to reject. Science just gives you, here's the number, and our response to that number of the size of the Earth, of the planet, of the universe, need not reduce us to insignificance. There are different responses possible that science itself would not be able to object to. We're talking spiritual responses to that realization of the vastness of the universe. It says something, if we have faith in a creator, it says something about that creator, and science is in no position to say you're wrong. Well, this universe that's so huge, when's it supposed to come to an end? Good question. The answer has been tricked out, and the answer is 10 duotrigantillion years from now. Okay. At the very end of let's explain what that looks like. At the very far end of the universe, of course, among scientists, you're going to have specialists. This number is disputed, but that's really not the point. It's a really, really big number. It gets very far away. So at the very end of the universe, maximum entropy is reached. Remember, so we have a state that's sometimes called heat death. This is where every source of usable energy anywhere in the universe has been exhausted at that point. So there's no more differences in temperature, there's no more gradients, there's no more pressure, no more density. Stars have burned out, black holes have evaporated, all of them. Matter itself has decayed into subatomic particles that are so far apart from each other that there's no possible interaction among them. In short, nothing can happen. Motion slows to just stillness, structure dissolves to uniformity, and the universe becomes a cold, dark, inert expanse, kind of like this, of nothingness persisting indefinitely as the final equilibrium of cosmic time. And so everything in the end is all utter stillness and darkness. Okay, remember, that's 10 duotrigintillion years from now. So we've got time before the holidays not to worry. So okay, let's scale it down. That's the universe. What about the Earth? Okay, when's that supposed to come to an end? Well, about 7 billion years from now, the entire planet will be destroyed by the sun, as the sun, remember, it has its own stellar history, and we know what that's going to be. It becomes a red giant, and it just engulfs the entire planet. That's about 7 billion years from now, give or take. But sooner than that, and this is where we're going to go from now on in today's session, the biosphere on Earth will experience, now follow me here, geophysical pressures. Stop. Geophysical pressures. Atmosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere. Good. And all their permutations. Before that happens, the Earth's biosphere will experience geophysical pressures that will select which ecosystems and species survive. Let me make this concrete and show you what I mean. Think Antarctica. Got it? Think Antarctica. It's just a vast expanse of nothing but white ice glaciers, right? Correct. Correct now. But tens and tens of millions of years ago, that was not what was happening on that continent. And Antarctica once supported lush life. We have plenty of evidence fossil-wise demonstrating that amply. The place was just filled with life. But changes in, you guessed it, the geosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere over millions of years selected against those ecosystems and species, and so they are no longer with us. Okay? So as I'm saying, at some point, the biosphere undergoes pressures from the Earth's systems, and things are always changing. So when we have to keep in mind, in the great age of the planet, we can observe something fascinating, and I want to unpack a chart with you. This is a chart going back 500 million years. It's a chart of the average global temperature from 500 million years ago to right about now. And the chart is compact, or it's dense. Let me explain why. And there's a reason I'm doing this, you'll see. Here, we are on a scale of thousands of years, so 5, 10, 15, 20,000 years, good. Hundreds of thousands of years, 800,000, a million years. Now, million-year scale here, tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. It's the only way you can get it all on one chart. Okay? Now notice something about the average global temperature. It's not a straight line. It's all over the place. Geophysical pressures. Okay? The Earth's orbit, the axis tilt, many other factors have brought remarkable changes in the average global temperature of the Earth. I also want to point out on a chart like this that when you see a sharp spike or drop in the average global temperature anywhere on this, remember that's over literally hundreds of thousands of years it changed from here to here. Good? Or even millions of years it took on this part of the chart to the temperature go from here to here. You good? All right. So we've got this line is 0, and that's simply taken as the average global temperature from 1960 to 1990. There's a sound methodological reason for that, and so that's our baseline. So this is where temperature has been relative to the average for in the late 20th century, and it's been way above, and it's been way below. And when you get to about 17,000 years ago, we're still in an ice age. This is very cold, and it's slowly rising to this period of time where notice how steady that is compared to everything else. You see it? That is what's called the Holocene. It's a unprecedented, actually, period of time in which the range of the average temperature of the Earth was relatively stable. And this had profound consequences for all species, and most of all, for our species. The point is that we have had dynamic changes going on over massive amounts of time these engagements between geosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. So it's clear that geophysical pressures have always driven the birth and death of ecosystems and species. Gotta say it. These species, most of whom have gone extinct for reasons you can see. Their environment changes due to what the Earth does, and when a species does not adapt or cannot adapt to the changes, it's curtains eventually for that species. This is the scientific story of the world. Extinction is part of the Earth story. Interestingly, I'm going to look at this more closely right now. Here we have the Ice Age, and we have this dip. And remember, this is over thousands and thousands of years, and we have the Holocene. This is the time that's been relatively stable and we might say pleasant. And very recently, we have this vertical spike where the kind of change that typically in prehistory, that kind of change in temperature would take thousands and hundreds of thousands of years to take place. It's happening in less than like 3 generations, that kind of spike in the average world temperature. And this is remarkable because if it weren't for that spike, the trend would be toward cooling. Because of the planet's orbit and axis factors, we are scheduled for, in terms of the planet, long term, we're due for a dip in the global world temperature. The world should be getting cooler, but it's not. Why is it not? It's driven by human activity. Here's a close-up of 1860, and you can see the average world temperature. And this is an estimate for where we're going to end up in 2025, which is higher than where we've been for hundreds of years. How do we know it's driven by human activity? Well, here's that same chart. You have a dip and you're getting cooler. There's your Holocene. Thank you very much. And this chart goes from way back to way in the future, 10,000 AD. This spike that I referred to, this spike is happening exclusively in the era where we've had fossil fuel available to burn. That era will eventually come to an end. We'll either use it all up or we'll find other sources for energy. But while we are still using fossil fuels, our global world temperature continues to spike until it doesn't. And so here we are in that period of time where fossil fuels are our primary source of energy and the temperature goes up. This is why we know it's from human activity. Well, what if it's not caused by human activity? And this is just a little point of levity where Hank and Ted are climate change deniers, and they realize that climate change exists as coins fall from the sky. Sorry. But really, can we be sure? Well, let's consider something. Let's consider the Asian plateau. It's sometimes called the Asian Water Tower. Asian Water Tower, this high elevation, these huge mountains, Himalayas and so forth, they store enormous amounts of water in glaciers and other ice forms. That allows the water in the glaciers to slowly melt during the summer, and that provides, and this is key, that provides water for 2 billion people. That in conjunction with the monsoons that come from the Indian Ocean. So what's the deal? The surface temperatures in the Asian plateau are warming twice as fast as most other parts of the world, and that's causing glaciers to melt earlier in the year, which shrinks the ice mass. So next year there's less ice to melt, and the following year there's less ice to melt, and the following year there's less ice to melt. And this also affects the agriculture down in the lowlands because the water is ill-timed for their agricultural patterns. Meanwhile, the sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean are messing up the monsoon pattern. And if you've been to that part of the world, the monsoon pattern, just billions of people rely on this thing. This is not a small deal. So farmers are they're getting longer dry spells, which means they have to pump out more water from the aquifer, which affects the subsidence of the land itself, which also affects the infrastructure built on the land. It's a real big ripple effect as the temperatures rise here. It has manifold effects for actual humans, 2 billion of them in the near and the far future. These are real developments. They're already observed. The physical links, sun, temperature, ice, water, monsoon, operate no matter what's causing the warming. They're not just model projections. So to be clear, the Asian water tower has not collapsed, but a collapse trajectory is consistent with what we're already observing. These are not just model projections and so forth. But we know for certainty that the global temperature is rising because of human impact, because of the basic physics of the fossil fuels. We can measure the molecules, we can examine them, they have a signature, they're coming from fossil fuels identified by a chemical signature. Volcanic eruptions doesn't account for it. The heat of the sun changes, doesn't account for it. Human burning of fossil fuel accounts for what we're seeing on the ground. Well, what kind of a human activity are we talking about? For one thing, population. Population has been growing for a good long while, but around about the middle of the 20th century, it just skyrocketed. And what are all those people doing? Well, they're burning energy. They're using up energy. So again, our energy consumption goes up, but by the mid-20th century, it just skyrockets, okay? And what are these people burning? They are burning largely coal, oil, and natural gas, fossil fuels, and that has brought in this correlation. What's the impact of these activities on the Earth? Well, let's start with the atmosphere. The impact that we have in our civilizational activities have increased the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for a good long while, but around about the mid-20th century, it just skyrocketed, and so you have all the ripple effects from that exponentially increased amount of our carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. How about the hydrosphere? That increased temperature has in turn influenced the ocean acidification, which has ripple effects for myriad species in the ocean that the species themselves depend upon and humans also depend upon for food. So there's an impact in the hydrosphere. How about the geosphere? Where are the habitable parts of the geosphere, types of soil, types of woodlands, types of fields and so forth are degrading. And again, right about the middle of the 20th century, just taking off on that scale. The interconnectedness, the correlation between human activity and Earth systems is real. Again, the human enterprise has just taken off from the mid-20th century. The Earth system impact has just taken off from the mid-20th century. This interconnectedness is real, yielding what's called the Great Acceleration. Great acceleration refers to this dramatic, continuous surge across a wide range of human activities registering in many parts. So this is both human activities and both impact. And again, the point being from the mid-20th century, it just goes off the scale. This acceleration has brought about what we call the Anthropocene era. And the Anthropocene simply means the human species has become a dominant influence on the planet's systems, the geosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere. That is to say, this change is attributable to the presence of our species on this planet. This rapid change, this great acceleration has been fantastic for humans. It has made life wonderful for billions of people. And lots of social and economic improvements, just one of dozens. Think of medicine. Think of what's happened in medical care in the 20th century, especially since about the mid-20th century. Fantastic. And by the way, still, that's a wonderful spike of the Great Acceleration, and it's still accelerating, improving human lives. There's no question about that, but at a cost. I'm not talking about just about medicine, but all these human activities, and that's the point. See, right now, Earth has whatever resources it has, and if we extract them so that the Earth can replenish them, that's called sustainable. But we're not there anymore. We are already, today, consuming the resources of 1.7 Earths, okay, already. And if the human enterprise continues and another good thing happens, what if the middle class expanded so that most of the world's population enjoyed the resources that we have in the United States? This planet doesn't have anywhere near the resources to support that. We would need 4 more planets to do that. The Great Acceleration places humanity at risk by pushing Earth's systems beyond their capacity to support stable societies. We're talking about water, carbon cycling is affected, water distribution is affected, the ecosystem structure. These processes are the basis for the biosphere's habitability. So climate change, now this is the ragged pill to swallow. Climate change is the central physical determinant of whether the Earth remains habitable. Certainly for the human species. Will our habitat continue to be habitable? That's not a small question. And it is a morally loaded question. It renders our answer to the question, what will happen to the Earth and what will happen to God's promises, the greatest moral challenge of our time, actually, as far as future generations are concerned. And by the way, footnote, I'm not even referring to other feed factors into the future, such as nuclear holocaust. It's not inconceivable under a certain configuration of circumstances that we do the wrong thing and we obliterate billions of people through nuclear catastrophe. Also, biochemical pathogens. It's possible that bad actors or even accidents can happen and the world's population is decimated by an unseen, unstoppable pandemic. But I'm choosing climate change for a reason, and that is as follows. One, nuclear. That might happen. It might not. Okay. Pathogens, pandemic. It might happen. It might not. You can't say that about climate change. It is happening right now. And if nothing changes, it will continue to happen with the kind of consequences we've been talking about. That's why we're focusing on climate change. There's been some pushback real quickly, and the pushback is this. Well, we'll figure it out. We will get together socially, economically, and especially scientifically, and we will figure out a way to decouple the growth of civilization with ecological destruction. We'll find a way to do it. And there are good reasons to go with this critique. Another critique is, well, we're not really certain. The models that we have, the data is incomplete. We can't draw firm conclusions about what the future holds in terms of climate change. And there's a lot of evidence to support that pushback. Another one is, well, it does no good just to go doom, doom, doom. Psychologically, we need to respond better than that reproach. And you know what? It's hard to argue against that. In any event, we face a great challenge. What is that challenge? Just talking about the future is difficult. And so we don't do it. So if we don't do it, we won't understand it. And if we don't understand it, we can't change anything. So we have to learn how to do this. And we're starting right now in this room. There are reasons it is culturally difficult. One is psychological. It's just tough to talk about the future. We don't take into consideration, we tend to compartmentalize. We just say, well, it's so unpleasant, I just don't think it's real. Or the science is flawed. Or I don't care, which is a psychologically understandable response. So that's one reason. Another reason is cultural. In our culture, we don't tend to think about future generations very much. We're not affected, they will be, but that doesn't seem to register significantly enough for us to really grapple with this. Another one is it's so vast. It's so impersonal. How do you even get your mind around climate change and climate change catastrophe? We're much better when we can just point to a person or some group of people or some concrete problem and say, there, we can address that, we can wrap our minds around that. But climate change is so vast. So there's reasons why it's difficult for us to talk about that. But given the difficulty, we're going to find several scenarios that are possible, and real quickly, and we're almost done. Collapse avoidance, one possibility is that we wake up in time and we get our act together and we find cheap, abundant energy and we can unlock a lot of these problems. And there are reasons to go with this scenario. Another one is, well, things collapse and fall apart, but we retool and we reboot at a more modest, eco-friendly scale and life goes on. And there are reasons why this is compelling. Another scenario is, well, it collapses and we survive, but it is pre-industrial civilization. It's really reduced. And this is a plausible scenario. Or it's just over. and the cockroaches and the microbes inherit the earth. And there are reasons for going with this outcome as well, which leaves us with this, okay, so what do we do? Either way, whatever scenario you find persuasive, the future is going to be tumultuous. Rapid industrial expansion has already led to degradation of climate change, and you have a domino effect. Environmental changes impact local economies, which forces people to move, sometimes within the same nation, sometimes internationally. Movements and demographic shifts and migrations bring social tensions whenever they happen. And social tensions destabilize societies. And that gives rise to nationalist political movements. And we're seeing all this happen right now, globally. It also accelerates trade and commerce, which is actually a good thing, but that has also disruptive effects on the social order. In short, the great acceleration means rapid social change is in our future, and it's already here with us. It's not new. We've had rapid social change for quite a long time. If we take the whole history of our species, we started out adapting to social changes. In the Ice Age, we learned how to control fire. That made a big difference for how we survive in the cold climates. Then we also figured out how to make insulated clothing, and that gave us a range over the entire planet that no other species could match except the microbes. Then we also figured out how to domesticate plants and animals. This is as the temperatures got more congenial in our period of a good climate. We learned how to domesticate our animals, plants. We learned how to domesticate ourselves into larger social groups. Larger social groups provides a basis, cultural basis for technologically based societies, technologies of storage of food, irrigation, agriculture, civilizations. So adaptation has always been included the emergence of cultural evolution, which magnifies our ability to adapt to environmental changes faster than just genetic evolution. Okay. But from a planet systems point of view, which is no longer ignorable, our adaptation to the environment actually means adapting the environment to us. And that has both been our survival and our future threat. There's never been such a rapid, deep shift in the physical basis for life. There's never before been a great acceleration. In fact, the great acceleration is simply a sign that the end of the world, as we have known it, is upon us. It's arriving. You understand what I mean? Things are going to change. And for many people, that's the end of the world, at least as we have experienced it. Well, that's always been happening. Here's a list of civilizations that have come and gone. The red arrows indicate those civilizations where climate change was a major factor that brought them to an end. And the blue arrows mean those are societies that climate change was not the major factor, but it was part of the mix, or at least it pushed things over the edge. The point is, all civilizations, first of all, come to an end. And all civilizations have to deal with climate change. Some do it better than others. So, are we facing the aspect of bunkerism? Is it just time to crawl into our bunkers or wait to be raptured? Is that what Jesus would do? The pace of social change challenges traditional cultural and religious norms, and that poses the question for us. This is where we're wrapping up and heading into next week. How does our faith address the future that science tells us that we face? Does being God's people in the world have any relevance for the unprecedented social changes of our time and for those changes yet to unfold? In the past, when we've been confronted by that kind of question, we've drawn upon the pre-modern myth, one way or the other, to provide orientation for the future. But that myth simply cannot serve us any longer as our North Star because it's unintelligible in an age of science. Or just remember the snake. We can't turn to that myth for this purpose. We need a new story. A new myth, you see, orienting story that not only interprets the past, but guides and inspires the shaping of the future. So, to conclude, our orienting story in which we find ourselves because we recognize it is true must be intelligible to us. Myth here doesn't mean untrue or unbelievable, it means the opposite. We need a scientifically true story that provides orientation for our lives and our communities. The Earth's story suggests itself as such a myth, such an orienting story. Why? It situates civilization in the ecological location that can sustain it. If we understand the Earth's story, we understand where civilization is and how it can be sustained in that Earth story. So if our new story is going to provide orientation, it cannot exclude the Earth's story. The situation we face invites us to reimagine the Earth story and our Christian story towards their integration. That is our task for next week. You've been so patient. Thank you.